He raised the gun, sweat dripping from his brow, cornered in the very bunker where he'd buried 15 years of lies. But before he could pull the trigger, she stepped forward, not with a weapon, but with her own handcuffs. "I won't protect him anymore," Officer Riley said, locking herself in. "If you don't speak, no one ever will." And in that moment, the entire system began to crumble. This isn't just a story about corruption. It's about what happens when silence ends. Hi, I'm glad you're here. If this is your first time on the channel, don't forget to like, comment below, and subscribe for more powerful, real-world stories that matter. And be sure to tap the notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. Now settle in, because the story of Kendra Wells, Camden Falls, in a truth buried deep, is just getting started. Camden Falls, Alabama looked like the kind of town that still waved at passing trucks and left church bulletins taped to diner windows. It was the kind of place where folks called you ma'am and meant it, where summer parades featured high school bands and not a single float dared play music louder than a hymn. But behind the picket fences and American flags, something had rotted, and Kendra Wells could smell it before she even crossed the city limits. She hadn't come to Camden Falls as an agent, though that's what her credentials said. She came as a sister, the kind who knew every childhood scar on her brother's body and knew the one on his wrist didn't belong there. Malik Wells had been a second-year med student, bright, gentle, the kind of young black man who still opened doors for strangers and always wore his college ID around his neck. Last fall, he had driven into Camden Falls on his way to a volunteer clinic. He never came home. The local police ruled it a suicide, found hanging behind the town library, closed the case in 48 hours, no press release, no autopsy photos shared, just a quiet burial and a louder silence. But Kendra didn't believe in coincidences, not after she saw the photo. It had come in the mail, unsigned, no return address, just a Polaroid of Malik's left wrist, bruised, raw, like it had been tied down, not cut by his own hand. And that was enough to move Kendra out of her office in D.C. and onto the cracked roads of Alabama. She didn't alert the local authorities. She didn't flash her badge. This wasn't about procedure. This was about truth. Dressed in plain jeans and a navy field jacket, she arrived in town with nothing but a black satchel and a notebook thick with questions. The photo was tucked into the front pocket. She'd memorized every pixel of it, every vein under Malik's skin. If the town had secrets, she intended to find them. The first place she visited wasn't the police station, it was the library. Not because of the crime scene, but because Malik had left a message there, scratched in pen on the back of a checkout card from 2 days before his death. It read, "If anything happens to me, ask about checkpoint 9. There was no such checkpoint on the public record. As Kendra stood under the rusted flagpole out front, watching the wind barely move the flag, she knew she was standing in a place where the rules had never been fair, and where people like her brother had always been expected to disappear quietly. But she hadn't come to disappear. She'd come to knock on doors until someone cracked, and if they didn't, she'd bring the whole structure down brick by brick. This wasn't just a town with a tragedy. It was a town with a cover-up, and Kendra Wells was about to pull the lid off it. The scent of floor wax and stale coffee greeted Kendra Wells as she stepped into the Camden Falls Town Hall. The air conditioning hummed low, barely stirring the heavy heat that clung to the walls. A smiling receptionist glanced up, her expression flickering for a moment before returning to polite neutrality. It wasn't the first time someone had walked through these doors with questions, but it was the first time someone brought the kind that demanded real answers. "I need to request a copy of a death record," Kendra said calmly, her voice crisp, practiced. The receptionist hesitated. "Name? Malik Wells, died October 14th of last year. Cause of death listed as suicide." The woman's fingers hovered over her keyboard. "I'm not sure we're authorized to release that without..." "Without what?" Kendra tilted her head. "A reason? A family connection? I'm his sister." That stopped the woman cold. Still, after a few uncertain keystrokes, she stood and mumbled, "One moment." She disappeared into a side hallway. Kendra waited. She could hear the faint buzz of voices beyond the frosted glass office doors, paper shuffling, a drawer slamming. Then a voice rose, low and gravelly. "Let her in." The door creaked open, and Mayor Harold Denton stood behind a cluttered desk, his pressed shirt 2 buttons too tight, a smirk curling beneath his silver mustache. "Miss Wells, is it?" he said, motioning toward a chair she didn't take. "I heard you've come a long way to dig up old business." "I'm not digging," she said. "I'm asking for a public record." Denton chuckled, but his eyes didn't smile. "This is a small town. We do things a little different here. Death records aren't exactly casual reading." "I didn't come here for leisure," Kendra replied evenly. Denton leaned forward. "Listen, I know it's hard losing someone, but your brother's case was closed. Tragic, yes. Suspicious, no. Let it go." She met his stare. "Do I look like someone who lets things go?" Before he could answer, a second door opened, and in walked Police Chief Ray Coulter, a thick-shouldered man with a worn face and the walk of someone used to being obeyed, his old army tattoo still peeked from under his sleeves. "You're the sister," he said flatly. "And you're the man who signed off on Malik's death scene before the coroner even got there." His jaw tightened. "Watch it." Kendra didn't blink. "I'm not the one who should be nervous." Denton rose from his chair. "That's enough. You come into our town, you start poking around, throwing accusations. I asked for a document," she cut in. "You're the ones turning this into a standoff." Coulter took a step closer, thumbs hooking his duty belt. "You're causing a disruption, Miss Wells. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I'm not leaving without answers." He nodded once. "Fine." And then he said it. "You're under administrative detainment for creating a public disturbance." Kendra didn't resist when 2 officers entered from the hallway and moved toward her. She didn't flinch as the cuffs clicked closed around her wrists, but as she was led down the corridor, past the receptionist who now stared at the floor, she glanced at a peeling section of wall just before entering the interview room. Exactly what she was looking for. Inside, they sat her down on a metal chair bolted to the floor. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. One of the officers stepped out. The other, a younger man barely out of his 20s, stood watch by the door. Kendra shifted slightly in her seat. Then, without drawing attention, she reached beneath the hem of her jacket sleeve, where a thin slit in the fabric opened just enough for her fingers to slip through. Inside was a button-sized transmitter activated by a double tap. She did it once, twice. Then, with practiced ease, she leaned back as if settling in. When her cuffed hands brushed the wall behind her, she made a subtle drop. A tiny object the size of a quarter slipped from her fingers and landed behind the chair rail molding. The device landed with a faint click, barely audible. A live GPS beacon, voice-activated recording, and a direct uplink to a secure satellite server. It was now listening and watching. As the door creaked open again, Chief Coulter stepped in. "You want answers?" he said. "I'll give you one. You're not welcome here. And you keep pushing, you're going to find yourself on the wrong end of a very short leash." Kendra just smiled, calm as still water. "I didn't come here to be welcomed," she said softly. "I came to remember my brother. And I want to make sure this town never forgets him again." The chief stepped forward, leaning in close, his voice almost a whisper. "You're a long way from Washington, lady. You're alone." She tilted her head ever so slightly. "That's where you're wrong." The air inside the holding room had thickened. The walls, pale gray and sweating with humidity, seemed to close in around Kendra Wells. Her cuffs had been loosened slightly, not out of mercy, but protocol. She sat motionless, eyes steady, jaw tight. Chief Coulter had left her alone again, no doubt assuming intimidation would do what logic hadn't. But Kendra wasn't here to plead. She was here to bait the trap. Exactly 14 minutes had passed since she dropped the tracking device behind the molding, and precisely 2 minutes ago, she'd triggered the backup failsafe, a secondary signal programmed to cut the uplink temporarily, making it appear on all federal channels that the beacon had gone dark. As if she'd been taken. Somewhere just outside Camden Falls, inside a nondescript black van parked in a church parking lot, a Department of Homeland Security field tech snapped to attention. The screen in front of him blinked red, signal lost, beacon silenced. Status, agent possibly compromised. Within 5 minutes, a secure line rang in Montgomery. Within 10, a federal tactical unit was mobilized. And they weren't coming through the front gate. 50 miles from town, just past the forgotten edge of Highway 82, an unmarked convoy veered off the main road and disappeared behind a boarded-up sign for Camp Dutton, Civil War Heritage Site. Few people knew the site sat atop a crumbling tunnel system, once used to transport wounded soldiers and munitions beneath Camden Falls during the 1860s. Even fewer knew it had been mapped in full by Homeland Security during a missing persons operation 7 years earlier. Now it would serve as the silent artery of a federal incursion. Inside the lead vehicle, Commander Tyrell Morgan, a man built like a freight engine and known for finishing what others hesitated to start, checked his watch. "If she's alive," he said, "she bought us this window." They didn't plan to waste it. Back in the holding room, the silence was broken by the low squeak of the door hinge. Officer Riley stepped in. She looked younger than Kendra expected, maybe late 20s, strawberry blonde hair pinned beneath her duty cap, badge number clipped at an angle. She held a tablet, though her hands trembled slightly. "Your name's Kendra Wells," Riley said, glancing down, avoiding eye contact. "That's right. You're not showing up in our system." "Good," Kendra replied calmly. "That means I still know how to do my job." Riley shifted uncomfortably. "Chief says you're grandstanding, that you're just looking for attention." Kendra leaned forward, voice low. "You took my brother from the library the night before he died." Riley froze. "I saw the report," Kendra continued. "You logged a pickup at 7:42 p.m. No warrant, no reason. You said he was acting suspicious. He was reading a medical journal." Riley's lips parted slightly. He was nervous, fidgety, looked like he didn't want to be seen. "Because he knew he was being followed," Kendra said, sharper now. "He'd already filed a complaint in Birmingham about a rogue checkpoint you all ran on Route 27. You remember that?" Riley's eyes began to glisten. She blinked hard. "He told me," Kendra said, voice softening, "that someone in uniform threatened to make an example out of him." "I didn't know," Riley whispered. "I swear I didn't know they were going to." "Did you see him alive after that night?" Riley nodded slowly. "Was he bruised? Bleeding?" A pause, then barely audible. "Yes." "And you didn't report it?" "I wanted to," Riley said, shaking now. "But Coulter, the chief, he told me to classify it as standard detainment. He said if I filed anything else, I'd be reassigned to patrol the east side. No partner, no backup. That's where the cartel traffic runs through." Kendra leaned back, disappointment folding over her face like a wave. "I joined to help people," Riley whispered, "not hide things like this." "You didn't just hide it," Kendra said, her voice quiet but cutting. "You helped bury him. Silence. The kind that tastes like metal and shame." "I can't undo what happened," Riley finally said, "but I can help now." Kendra studied her carefully. "Then you need to do more than cry. You need to walk me out of here and act like you don't know what's coming." Riley blinked. "Coming? You've got 15 minutes before federal boots come through that basement tunnel under City Hall. When they do, you'll want to be on the right side of the breach." Riley swallowed hard. "You planned this?" "I planned for liars," Kendra said, standing slowly. "Not you, but you get to decide what you are." 3 blocks away, in the town's shuttered utility station, the federal team emerged from beneath a rusted steel grate, weapons holstered but ready. Commander Morgan checked the coordinates. "She's in the main building. First floor, cell 2. A narrow brick tunnel would lead them directly beneath the mayor's office, where Kendra had been interrogated just hours earlier. But that wasn't the mission anymore. Now it was a recovery. And a reckoning. Back in the hallway, Riley typed in a 10-digit code and unlocked the hallway gate. She didn't make eye contact, didn't say another word. But as she opened the side door that led to the record room, empty during lunch hours, she slipped a flash drive into Kendra's palm. "What's this?" "Security footage from the night Malik was brought in," Riley said quietly, "including the part they thought they deleted." Kendra stared at her, then nodded. "You still have time." Riley hesitated at the door. "Will they believe me?" "They don't need to," Kendra said. "The truth doesn't wait for permission." And then, just before the alarm lights flickered from deep within the building, the first sign the feds were breaching, Kendra vanished into the hallway, her satchel zipped tight, her mission no longer a search for answers. It was a manhunt. And the hunted were wearing badges. The sun had started to dip behind the sycamore trees lining Main Street, casting long shadows over Camden Falls. Kendra Wells moved quickly through the narrow alley behind the courthouse, keeping low, her breath steady. Riley's flash drive was secured inside her satchel, along with the beacon now reconnected to the federal uplink. The team would have full access to her location within seconds. But she wasn't running. She was hunting. The last item on her list, the one that mattered more than all the others, was locked away inside a place most folks in town didn't like to talk about, the county morgue. It was housed behind Camden General Hospital in a squat gray building with flickering security lights and rust-stained siding. She'd already checked the public archive. The official autopsy of Malik Wells had been suspiciously brief. 3 paragraphs, no photo documentation, and signed by a coroner who'd retired the very next day. There had to be more. And someone was making sure no one ever found it. Kendra walked in through the rear staff entrance, which Riley had discreetly unlocked before her shift ended. The hallway smelled of bleach and thyme. She passed 2 vending machines and a faded poster about opioid awareness before reaching the double doors marked restricted, medical examiners only. Inside was a clerk, mid-30s, wiry, wearing a Navy EMS sweatshirt and headphones that clearly weren't playing music. His name tag read J. Burns, and he barely glanced up when she entered. "I'll only need a few minutes," Kendra said calmly. He looked up at her, then squinted. "You're the one asking about the Wells kid." Kendra met his eyes. "Yes, I want to see the original autopsy files, the ones that never made it to the sheriff's archive." He stood slowly, peeled the headphones off. "You shouldn't be here." "I know." He hesitated. "You look like him." She waited. "He was nice," Burns said. "Smart, scared, but polite. We talked about jazz music while I filled in the paperwork. Next morning, they told me to change my notes." Kendra's heart tightened. "Who told you?" she asked. He didn't answer, just stared at her for a long second, then motioned to the back cooler. "Locker 19, he said, "but you didn't hear it from me." She stepped toward the cooler, her boots echoing off the tile floor. Then all at once, the lights flickered. A sharp crack echoed overhead. A fuse? No, something more. Burns turned toward the hallway, confused. And then, boom. A fireball erupted from the east wall of the building, shattering glass and sending Kendra flying to the floor as the sprinkler system kicked in. Smoke poured in through the air vents. Sirens began to wail inside and out. She crawled across the floor toward Burns, who was gasping, stunned. One side of the morgue wall had buckled inward from the blast. Someone had rigged it. 15 minutes. It had been exactly 15 minutes since she said the word autopsy, and someone had already lit the match. Outside, fire trucks screamed into the lot. Flames licked through the morgue's roofline as paramedics rushed to secure the area. But Kendra, soaked from the sprinklers and coughing, had one goal left. She grabbed Burns by the collar. "Did you back anything up? Files? Photos?" His eyes fluttered open. "Locker room, top shelf." She pulled him up, half dragged him toward the back hallway. The fire hadn't reached there yet. Behind a supply closet, she found it, a green janitor's duffel bag stuffed with cleaning supplies, and a small red USB drive taped to the inside lining. Burns coughed hard. "I wasn't going to keep it. I just couldn't delete it either." "What's on it?" Kendra asked, already securing it in her jacket. He looked at her with glassy eyes. "Camera feed. From the back stairwell. Night Malik died. Someone forgot to scrub that one. Why didn't you come forward?" He shook his head. "You don't understand. Around here, people disappear for less." She tightened her grip. "Not anymore." Kendra exited the building through a side utility door as firefighters flooded the west side. The chaos gave her just enough cover to slip away. She circled behind the hospital and ducked into a maintenance shed. Only once she was inside, door shut, did she plug the USB into her secured tablet. What she saw stopped her breath. The video was grainy, standard black and white night vision. The hallway was familiar, back stairwell of the police annex. A timestamp blinked faintly, October 13th, 11:19 p.m. The first figure appeared. Malik, head down, arms cuffed behind his back. Officer Riley at his side. A second officer trailing behind, face partially obscured. They entered the stairwell. Then came Chief Coulter, stepping in from the opposite hallway. The video had no audio, but the body language was clear. Coulter stepped forward, shouted something, and pointed upward. Malik tried to respond. Coulter shoved him, hard. Malik stumbled, struck the metal railing. Then the second officer grabbed his shoulder and spun him around, and pushed. Malik fell backward, his hand still cuffed. The screen jolted as his body dropped. The timestamp blinked out. End of footage. Kendra stared at the tablet, hand shaking. This wasn't just abuse. It wasn't neglect. It wasn't a cover-up by silence. It was murder. Cold, calculated. Signed, sealed, and silenced by men who still walked the streets with shields on their chests. Her brother hadn't taken his life. They took it from him. Outside, smoke still curled into the night sky. The fire at the morgue was under control, but the damage was done. The files had been destroyed. But the truth? She now held it in her hands. And when the morning came, the people of Camden Falls would see it for themselves. No more whispers. No more excuses. The flame they started to hide a crime had just lit the fuse to blow everything wide open. The town square of Camden Falls had never been so carefully dressed. Rows of folding chairs lined the lawn in front of Town Hall. Patriotic banners flanked the platform, and an overpolished podium stood center stage, its microphone already live. It was Mayor Harold Denton's idea, a last-minute public healing vigil in honor of Malik Wells. But those who knew the truth could feel the lie before the first candle was even lit. A choir hummed softly. The sheriff's department stood flanking the crowd, most of them in dress blues, hands folded in front of them. The mayor stepped up to the mic and adjusted his tie as the cameras from the local news station flickered on. "Tonight," he began solemnly, "we honor a young man lost far too soon, a tragedy that has weighed heavy on our hearts. Malik Wells was..." In the third row, two elderly women exchanged skeptical glances. One whispered, "Funny, they never said a word about him till now." Behind the crowd, beneath the shadows of a large oak tree, Kendra Wells adjusted the strap of her shoulder bag. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from focus. The projector was ready. The USB had been duplicated, and the truth was about to be impossible to bury. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a device no bigger than a flashlight. At first glance, it looked like a simple laser pointer. In reality, it was a high-output micro-projector with Wi-Fi sync, linked directly to a secure satellite uplink. She pointed it toward the smooth, white marble facade of the town hall and pressed play. At first, nothing happened. The mayor continued, "A promising student, a beloved member of our community." Then the screen blinked to life. A grainy black and white hallway. A timestamp. Malik, cuffed, pushed. Gasps echoed through the crowd. The mayor faltered mid-sentence. What is this?" Murmurs rose into shouts. "Is that real? Who pushed him? Was that Coulter?" The video played again, looped for clarity. 3 officers. 1 push. No struggle, no fight, just gravity. Kendra stepped forward now, visible to all, standing just at the base of the platform. "You want to honor my brother?" she said, voice steady, resonating through the stunned silence. "Then watch how he died. Watch what they tried to erase." No one stopped her. Not yet. The mayor reached for his earpiece, whispering frantically to his staff. The projector flickered, once, twice, then cut to black. A second later, so did the entire town square. Darkness. Total. Then the sound of running feet, yells, radios clicking to static. Power hadn't just gone out. It had been cut manually. Inside the town's utility center, just a few blocks east, an emergency technician lay slumped in his chair, zip ties around his wrists. The access panel beneath the main grid had been pried open, manual override activated. This wasn't a malfunction. It was a message. Within 5 minutes, the tactical team stationed outside the city perimeter activated Protocol B. Camden Falls was officially under lockdown. Intersections were blocked, cell towers jammed, the perimeter tightened like a noose. No one in, no one out. Commander Tyrell Morgan stepped out of the surveillance van, headset on. "The blackout wasn't ours," he said into his mic. "We've got an internal actor, possibly still inside Town Hall. Teams 1 and 2, move on my mark." Back at the square, panic began to bubble. The mayor tried to calm the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stay calm. This appears to be a technical..." He never finished. A spotlight snapped on from across the lawn, catching him in its glare. From the rooftop of Camden Bank, a second projector flared to life, this one preset on a delay. The same footage began again, this time larger, bolder, and louder. Speakers mounted on the roof amplified Malik's final steps. The crowd stood frozen. Some wept, some cursed. Kendra didn't speak this time. She didn't have to. She simply held up a flash drive high above her head and said, "This copy's already been sent to the Department of Justice, to CNN, to my agency. The moment they cut the power, I sent it." Now even the officers shifted uneasily. Chief Coulter was nowhere to be seen. Neither was Officer Briggs, the man in the video pushing Malik. They were already running. Inside Town Hall, two officers scrambled through the underground stairwell, dragging a locked case and muttering about getting to the helipad. But the doors wouldn't open. The coded entry panel blinked red, disabled remotely. From the security booth, Riley watched on the monitor and finally spoke into her radio. "Control, this is Officer Riley. Suspects attempting unauthorized escape route. Recommend full containment. You are clear to proceed." She didn't wait for a reply. She simply stood, took off her badge, and placed it on the desk. Then she walked out. In the square, the power flickered back on, but the illusion of order was already shattered. One by one, residents of Camden Falls turned to the stage, not for leadership, but for accountability. A middle-aged black man stepped forward. "I remember when Malik came to our clinic. He treated my granddaughter's asthma. He deserved better. A teacher, a retired Marine, a former town clerk. They stepped up one by one, stories pouring like rain." The wall of silence had broken. And Kendra, still holding the flash drive, knew this was no longer about just her brother. This was about every name that never made it to a vigil, every file burned, every life dismissed as tragic but unremarkable. From the shadows, Mayor Denton stepped back from the microphone and whispered to an aide, "Call the governor." But it was too late. The people weren't listening to him anymore. Beneath the crumbling police station, hidden behind a reinforced steel door marked storage, archives, a bomb shelter built during the Cold War, now served a very different purpose. The air was thick, dry, and humming with the low buzz of old fluorescent lights. Steel file cabinets lined the walls, covered in layers of dust, but the labels on them were recent: names, years, badge numbers, case IDs. Some files were handwritten, others were stamped with confidential and internal review only. And standing in the center of it all, his back to a table of shredded reports, was Police Chief Ray Coulter. He held a sidearm loosely in his right hand, just low enough to pretend it wasn't a threat, but high enough to remind anyone that it could become one. His shirt was damp with sweat, his eyes, bloodshot and tired, locked on the woman standing across the room. Kendra Wells didn't flinch. "This is where you've kept it all," she said softly, her voice steady. 15 years of secrets. And all of it leads to two men who thought they'd never be caught. Coulter's jaw worked like a machine about to break. "You don't understand what this town needed, what it still needs." "I understand perfectly," Kendra said, reaching into her satchel. She pulled out a thin manila folder, edges frayed, tabs labeled in red ink. She began reading aloud. "Kenneth Moore, age 17, accused of theft. No evidence, no trial, vanished from holding cell in 2010. Angela Ruiz, school teacher, filed complaint about officer harassment, found with a broken arm and no record of arrest. Nathan Glass, filed a lawsuit against the city, case dismissed after body cam footage accidentally lost. Malik Wells, accused of nothing, detained for asking questions, murdered for refusing to be silent." With each name, her voice grew firmer, cutting through the stale air like a blade. "Stop," Coulter's voice cracked. But Kendra wasn't done. She flipped to the next page. "This report shows a bank account routed through the Municipal Legal Fund, monthly deposits totaling over $80,000, most of it disappearing into a secondary account under the name HD Holdings." She looked up, letting the initials hang in the air. "Harold Denton," she said, "and guess who co-signed the fund? Judge Carl Redmond, Federal Circuit." Coulter's hand twitched. "This wasn't just bad policing," Kendra said, voice rising. "It was racketeering, organized fraud. You turned this department into a pipeline for fear, and you lined their pockets with the results." "You think you're a hero," Coulter snapped, You're just another outsider who doesn't understand what it takes to keep a town like this from falling apart. No, she replied. I'm the one who's going to stop it from rotting any further. He raised the gun. Raised that gun, this time deliberately. You walk out of here, you burn this place to the ground, he said, his voice low. And for what? Some twisted sense of justice? I'm not walking out alone, Kendra said, and you know it. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the stairwell above. Put it down, Chief. Both of them turned. Officer Riley stood in the doorway, her service weapon in hand. Coulter narrowed his eyes. You don't want to do this, Riley. Her hands trembled, but she kept the barrel pointed low. I already did. The night Malik died, I didn't ask questions. I just followed orders. That ends tonight. You point that gun at me, Coulter said, and you're done. I was already done the moment I helped cover up a murder. Then slowly, deliberately, Riley turned the gun sideways and offered it to Kendra. I won't shoot him, she said, her voice cracking, but I won't protect him anymore either. Then she reached into her belt pouch, pulled out her own cuffs, and clipped them around her own wrists. Click, click. She let the silence carry her shame. If you don't speak, no one ever does, she whispered. They used us like pawns. They built a wall of silence out of our obedience. I'm stepping out. Kendra took the gun gently from her hand and nodded. Coulter looked between the two women, one unarmed, one in chains, and for the first time, he looked small, not in stature, but in purpose. It's over, Kendra said. You just haven't admitted it yet. Above them, the echo of boots began to ring down the stairwell. The federal team was closing in, but Kendra didn't rush. She stood still in that bunker, the belly of a beast built on secrets, and waited. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it walks in quietly and refuses to leave. The echo of boots grew louder down the stairwell. The sound wasn't panicked or aggressive. It was deliberate, precise, and final. Federal agents swept into the bomb shelter like a tide. Guns raised, vests marked DHS, FBI, and Mobilize marshals. But Kendra Wells simply stood back, hands raised casually, the evidence in her satchel already zipped and labeled. The agents moved fast. Ray Coulter didn't resist. Neither did Mayor Denton, who was found 2 floors up in his office, shredding papers like a man erasing footprints in sand. 4 senior officers were cuffed and removed from the station. 2 wept, 1 spit, all were silent. The last thing Coulter saw before being taken up the stairs was Officer Riley, standing unarmed with cuffs on her own wrists. She wasn't crying. She wasn't apologizing. She had stepped out of the system, and now it was collapsing behind her. 2 days later, Camden Falls was placed under federal oversight. A 24-month consent decree was signed, with full Department of Justice supervision. Investigators were dispatched. Audits began. The station's server room, long thought corrupted, was recovered, revealing dozens of complaints, erased videos, and unsent reports. Kendra delivered every piece of evidence in a black case file to the U.S. Attorney's Office, complete with chain of custody documentation and signed witness affidavits. She handed over the flash drive, the financial records, and Riley's full testimony. Riley was granted whistleblower protection and later took the stand before a federal grand jury. Her voice was nervous but clear. When asked why she turned herself in, she said, "Because I realized fear wasn't the same thing as loyalty." But the real shock came a week later. Kendra was back in Washington, sitting at a desk strewn with paperwork, when a secure line blinked on her encrypted phone. The voice on the other end was familiar, cautious, soft. "Hi, Ken." For a moment, she didn't speak. Her breath caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. "Malik," she whispered. "It's me." She stood as slowly, hand trembling. "I saw you fall. I saw what they did." "I know," he said, "but someone pulled me out. An old ER doc who owed our family a favor. He knew what was happening, and he smuggled me into the witness protection program before Coulter could finish the job." Tears slipped down her cheeks silently. "Why didn't you let me know?" "They told me you'd be safer if I stayed dead," he said. "But when I heard what you did, what you exposed, I knew I couldn't stay buried." He paused. "I'm proud of you, Kendra. You did what I couldn't." She smiled faintly, voice cracking. "You were the match. I was just the flame." The next morning, Kendra boarded a quiet train out of Montgomery, her satchel lighter than it had been in months. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. No press, no interview, no ceremony. She had never done this for credit. Before the train pulled away, she sat by the window and pulled out her leather-bound notebook. The pages were worn, the corners dog-eared. She flipped past dates, maps, quotes, past sketches of town squares and pieces of overheard testimony. Then on a fresh page, she wrote, "Case closed." She paused. Then below it, in smaller handwriting, "I didn't tear down a town." I unlocked the silence. Back in Camden Falls, a new police chief arrived. From Mobile, a woman of color with a history of integrity and a reputation for not flinching. She brought in her own staff. The police department's entire internal affairs division was rebuilt from scratch. Bias training became mandatory. Anonymous complaint systems were installed and audited externally. But more importantly, the people of Camden Falls started speaking up. For the first time in decades, citizens filed reports without fear of retaliation. Parents questioned school officers, ministers joined city council meetings, veterans demanded transparency. The silence had been broken. Riley was offered reinstatement, but declined. Instead, she enrolled in a criminal justice reform program at Auburn, saying, "If I'm going to wear a badge again, I want to know I deserve it." The old town hall still stood, but the banners were gone, the lights were dimmer, the paint was starting to peel. In its place, a community board appeared, covered in notes, photos, candles. At the center of it all, a framed picture of Malik Wells smiling in his medical school sweatshirt. Underneath it, someone had written in Sharpie, "Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just shows up and refuses to back down." In the end, the story of Camden Falls wasn't just about corruption or cover-ups. It was about the price of silence and the courage it takes to break it. What Kendra Wells did wasn't flashy. She didn't come with a team of lawyers or a swarm of cameras. She came with truth, with persistence, and with something far more powerful than a badge: conviction. And through her quiet strength, we saw how one determined voice can bring down a wall that stood for years, built on fear, upheld by lies, and passed down through generations. But this story also reminds us that justice doesn't always come roaring in. Sometimes it comes quietly. It walks into the room with a folder, not a fist. It speaks calmly, but carries decades of hurt behind it. And it doesn't back down, not because it's louder than everyone else, but because it knows it's right. For many of us watching, especially those of us who've lived long enough to see history repeat itself, this tale feels familiar. Maybe we've seen our own versions of Camden Falls, a workplace where wrongdoings were ignored, a neighbor who was treated unfairly because of how they looked, a time when we felt something was off, but said nothing. What this story teaches us is that it's never too late to stand up, not just for ourselves, but for those who can't. Sometimes it takes someone like Kendra. Other times it takes someone like Riley, someone who realizes that following orders blindly can be just as dangerous as giving them. And then there are people like you and me, witnesses to the world, with a voice that still matters. Because the truth is, no town heals by pretending nothing happened. No community grows by staying quiet. And no generation ever changed the future by waiting for someone else to speak first. So whether you're a mother, a veteran, a retired teacher, or just someone who believes in doing right when it's hardest, this story was for you. It's a reminder that justice isn't a moment, it's a commitment. And the moment we stop expecting someone else to fix it is the moment we start becoming part of the solution ourselves. If this story moved you, even just a little, I invite you to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to my channel for more stories that reveal the truth behind the silence. Don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter in our journey for justice, courage, and community. Because these aren't just stories. They're mirrors. And sometimes all it takes is the courage to look in one and speak.